Good evening. It's my honor to welcome to Harvard's John F. Kennedy School of Government tonight Dr. Georgi Arbatov. We could hardly have a more timely topic or a more appropriate speaker on a day when Ambassador Dobrynin and President Reagan's 15-minute meeting went on for about an hour and a half, and the U.S. nuclear test that had been scheduled for today was postponed for reasons of weather, it was announced. Dr. Arbatov is a native of the Ukraine, a veteran of World War II, and a graduate with a doctoral degree in historical sciences from the Moscow Institute of International Relations, which some of Dr. Arbatov's colleagues have said is some version of their Kennedy School of Government. Early in his career, he worked as a writer and editor for the journals Communist and Problems of Peace and Socialism. In 1964, he became special consultant to a then little-known secretary of the Central Committee of the Communist Party, Yuri Andropov. Dr. Arbatov is today a member of the Soviet Central Committee, which is, after the Politburo, the most important policy-making body in the Soviet Union. He is director of the Institute of USA and Canadian Studies, which he founded in 1967. The Institute's 350 researchers are the principal researchers in the Soviet Union responsible for studying all aspects of American life, ranging from U.S. nuclear policy on the one hand to the music of Bruce Springsteen on the other. Dr. Arbatov is also the author or co-author of 7 books and is an academician of the Soviet Academy of Sciences, which is the highest rank for a Soviet scholar. A longtime advisor of Soviet leaders, Dr. Arbatov played a key role in the design of the basic principles of agreement, which were signed by Leonid Brezhnev and Richard Nixon in 1972. More recently, he and a number of his associates from the Institute attended last November's summit meeting between Mikhail Gorbachev and Ronald Reagan in Geneva, where he was one of the principal spokesmen for the Soviet government. As a frequent guest at diplomatic exchanges and American television shows, indeed you can see him on Good Morning America tomorrow, Dr. Arbatov is often publicly challenged about issues such as the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, intimidation of Poland, persecution of dissidents, and restrictions on Jewish immigration. And I suspect we'll hear something about these topics tonight. His usual defense when pressured about the Soviet record is to launch a counteroffensive against U.S. policy. Indeed, he's been so effective in that on occasions that in 1981, the Reagan administration judged him to be too dangerous in his articulation of the Soviet viewpoint and lifted his visa temporarily so that he could not appear on a public television debate. Those who've met Dr. Arbatov have been impressed with his ability to advocate the Soviet point of view. Henry Kissinger recalls in his memoirs that Dr. Arbatov, quote, was skillful in adjusting his arguments to the prevailing fashions. He was especially subtle in playing inexhaustible masochism of American intellectuals who took it as an article of faith that every difficulty in U.S.-Soviet relations had to be caused by some American stupidity or intransigence. He was endlessly ingenious in demonstrating how American rebuffs were frustrating the peaceful, sensitive leaders in the Kremlin who were being driven reluctantly by our inflexibility into conflicts that offended their inherently gentle natures, close quote. On the other hand, one of the... He pleads guilty, yes, okay. On the other hand, one of the highest-level Soviet defectors, Arkady Shevchenko, makes a serious effort in his own autobiography to put Dr. Arbatov down, but the way he does it I find very interesting to interpret. He states, quote, while the Soviet Union and the United States were formulating their positions on the SALT I Treaty, many Americans assumed that Arbatov was a major figure in behind-the-scenes maneuvering. But, he says, all key decisions were made by the Politburo on the basis of recommendations by Gromyko, Ustinov, Grechko. Arbatov was less influential than Dobrynin, close quote. To be by default named number 5 by somebody trying to put you down as an advisor on SALT I is no mean achievement. So please join me tonight in welcoming the top Soviet expert on the United States and, to the best of our knowledge, the first forum speaker ever to have won 2 Orders of Lenin and the Order of the Red Star, Dr. Georgy Arbatov.
Thank you. I think my good communist reputation and Orders of Lenin make up a little bit for Mies and his invitation to this audience. Graham, ladies and gentlemen, to speak in Harvard is a great privilege. Harvard is. I was told that one of its presidents, Charles Eliot, had in his office a 5-foot bookshelf, the contents of which he described as the Bible and other Harvard classics. That was probably a slight exaggeration, but the fact remains that although Harvard does not fare nowadays well in Sovietology, with one exception of Marshall Goldman, he is here, I think. In many other disciplines, its scholars chalked up impressive results. You know, while preparing for this meeting, I read quite a few things and learned quite a few things, among them about the 300th anniversary of which was quite an event in American life, and it was half a century ago. And I tried to compare both these periods. You know, the world at large and the United States were at this time at a crossroads after the Great Depression. And, well, there were debates going on in this country, including what road to choose, to capitalism with a human face, or towards rugged capitalism, you know, individualism. There were also debates on major foreign policy issues, whether to see the danger looming over the world of fascism, of New World War, or to try to sit it out beyond the ocean, or even to try to pull the chestnuts out of the fire, which was going on to start in Europe. This split was everywhere in the United States, also in Harvard, and it is recorded in some books that the then standoffish university establishment gave a cool reception to and treated nearly as a renegade one of its most famous alumni who attended the Jubilee, the 32nd U.S. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Much has changed since then in Harvard, in the country, and of course in the White House. And yet it seems that there is something in common between the then situation and the situation we are witnessing now. There are still debates about the limits and goals of government interference, about the destiny of the welfare state, about America's role in the world and the ways of guaranteeing its security. Much in these debates is up to you to decide, and I would not like to get involved in them. I think that you have before you a very big agenda of discussion, and I'm sure you will make it out yourself. But there are questions which affect us just as much as they affect you, and vice versa, of course. There are questions which we have to decide which will affect you, such as the world's interdependence, whether we like it or not. Apparently, each generation thinks much of its historical role. Each generation seeks, and as a rule finds, its special place in history, though it is true that descendants frequently disagree with the self-estimates, which makes me apprehensive of exaggerating generation, of our generation. Nevertheless, I will venture the following conclusion. We who live on Earth toward the end of the 20th century have many reasons to believe that we have a unique role to play. if we commit a really big folly, everything that all the previous generations have achieved at the cost of great efforts, suffering, and bloodshed will go to waste. And as to posterity, we shall simply exclude it from history, leaving it no chance to correct our or commit errors of their own. Therefore, we should give serious thought to some crucial questions and reflect on the world we live in. You know, up till now, we tend to discuss how did we survive for the nuclear age. I would say that my own assessment would be that it was mostly not due to wise statesmanship, but to a very great degree to sheer luck. And therefore, I think we have to understand, this is maybe the crucial question of the situation at this stage of history, that we just cannot go on as we did previously. You know, we cannot have 40 months of such relations, of such arms race, of such international crises. It becomes tremendously dangerous and maybe even impossible to survive. And we feel it, I think, especially in last years and even last months, because of course we went through a rather difficult period in our history. You know, to have 3 state funerals in 3 years was a very painful experience. And to live with sick leaders, it's also not very simple. You have accumulation of problems. So now there is a very interesting and I think a very productive stage in our development and in our way of thinking, in an attempt to apprehend the problems which we face in our country and also in the world. While in Paris in October '85, Gorbachev, noting that human thinking can unfortunately lag behind the quickly changing reality, pointed out that we in the Soviet Union have begun to rethink, in conformity with the new realities, many customary approaches to problems, including those fields of foreign policy and of military policy. This process of rethinking has, of course, not ended, but has already produced some new ideas and concepts which were expressed in a series of Soviet foreign policy decisions and initiatives during the past year. And conceptually, it was, I think, summed up at the 27th Congress of our party, which is Congress of a party is quite an event in our country. And being here among students of American government, I would compare it to 5 the Union messages and 1 inauguration speech together. And so there was expressed also a new concept of our understanding of the world in which we live and new understanding of international security. I would stress a few points from it. One of the the major component of this concept is based on the understanding that in the nuclear age, no state can get security by military and technological means alone, even with the aid of the most up-to-date defense. Providing security, I cite General Secretary Gorbachev, is increasingly seen as a political problem, and it can be resolved only by political means. End of the quote. The second important point which we made was that it is impossible today to enjoy security at the expense of the other side or to its detriment. Speaking of USSR-United States relations, security can be only reciprocal. Speaking of international relations as a whole, it can only be universal. The third point which I wanted to stress here is that we have to understand that we are living in a very dynamic world with a lot of changes, with a growing number of active participants in international politics. And this makes the world picture tremendously complicated. But whether we like it or not, we cannot set the clock back. We have to adapt ourselves to this reality. And that means learning to live in the present complex and controversial world, taking into account its realities and reckoning not only with one's own interests, but also with the interests of other countries and peoples, and finding mutually acceptable decisions. Realizing that the world we live in is becoming too small and too fragile for wars and power politics, imperial ambitions, a runaway arms race, ideological and political intolerance, the Soviet leadership at the Congress appealed to all countries and all peoples, to the United States, of course, as well, to cooperate in building a new universal system of international security, which would be built on this understanding of this new realities of the world we live in. We felt that this appeal was especially appropriate after Geneva and was in full accord with the spirit and the letter of the statement signed there last November by Gorbachev and President Reagan. You will recall that the statement, among other things, expresses firm commitment of both leaders to improve Soviet-American relations and normalize the international situation as a whole. Now 5 months have passed, 4.5 months have passed since Geneva. And what actually are the results? I would be less than honest with you would I say that we are satisfied, and I think you must be not satisfied with the development of events as it happened after Geneva. I think we saw movement of policies of both countries in opposite direction. Soviet Union saw in Geneva a source of encouragement to seek for new ways, for new proposals, for new solutions which would break up the numerous vicious circles in which we got in our relations and in which the world got in international relations as a whole. I don't want to list all the things we did, but you must have read the new proposals from 15th of January, where we proposed a plan in 3 stages to how to get rid of nuclear weapons. Together with many other proposals, we actually 3 times prolonged the moratorium on nuclear tests. And I can tell you, I was even witness a couple of times to it, that this is not true that we've simply finished the tests which we needed for our weapon systems and then proposed the moratorium. I know for sure that our leadership was and is under serious pressure from military people, from people who are involved in technology and military technology, to go on with tests. So it was a bona fide proposal which stays up till now, up to today. I don't know what happens tomorrow, what weather there will be tomorrow. We also tried to understand in a proper way what are the major concerns of Americans, and tried to be as forthcoming as we can. And this meant that we were ready also for some compromises and concessions. In field of this middle-range missiles in Europe, you call them INF. In field of verification, on many other issues. I do not want to paint black and white pictures to convince you that we are good. This was Kissinger's invention among many that he did. And you are bad, but you know, during this period we haven't seen really adherence to this spirit and letter of Geneva in American policy. I have in mind how our proposals were answered. The reaction of United States towards our moratorium on nuclear tests. I have in mind the whole military policy of United States. There was no moderation. I think that this was an unprecedented appeal of the president to increase the appropriations for armaments by 12%, adding to what was to this very serious increase which happened in last years. The rhetorics also became to be dominated by the evil empire syndrome. So all in all, it looks, and this is our reading, this is how we understand it, that in the United States up till now prevails a different concept of the world divided into black and white fields, a world which has become an arena of irreconcilable struggle between the forces of evil and the forces of good. Forces of good, of course, being the U.S., minus perhaps the liberals and the majority of House of Representatives of the United States. And the forces of evil, that's us, Cuba, Nicaragua, and to whom the administration links up everybody and everything feared or abhorred by respectable and God-fearing Americans. And of course, from this, it looks as if the prevailing thought is that any reconciliation between the good guys and the bad guys is out of the question. Even when the negotiations are mentioned, what is implied, as it looks to us, is a place where the forces of evil will sign an act of their unconditional surrender. What is behind such position, as we understand it? What is behind it? And such concept? There are different opinions in my country. And I am myself not sure what is behind it. Whether the administration really take the view of the world in such way as it describes it? Do they really believe that a terrible threat is looming over America and that it is on the verge of an economic blockade, isolation from its allies, and finally direct military invasion, not only from east and north, but as it appears now, also from the south via Mexico? And do they really think that the USSR, with only 1/4 of gross national product of the United States and its allies, and 1/3 of their population, has a decisive military superiority and is about to execute its sinister plans to invade the United States, which was so colorfully visualized in the Red Dawn and will be visualized, as I understand, in America through K, not through C. Or maybe something entirely different is involved, namely that the present American leadership is actually very well informed about the real situation and real facts of life, and to put it mildly, tries to mislead the American and world public in pursuit of quite certain selfish, I would say nearsighted and very dangerous political goals, such as gaining military superiority, as attaining U.S. hegemony in all crucial regions, as setting up throughout the world an economic and political order tailored to its taste. I have no final answer as to which of these versions is more correct, whether we deal with ignorance and bigotry or with sheer cynicism, or perhaps with a bizarre combination of both. What is more, I do not think it is so terribly important, for both of them seem to be equally dangerous. Dangerous to us, dangerous to the whole world, and dangerous to the United States itself. You know, this present American concepts of the world, which I think form out of the latest declaration, especially during last months, imply a throwback to political orientations outdated and at variance with the realities of the nuclear age and with the whole character, aspirations, and demands of the complex contemporary world. In this sense, I think it was very revealing that recently the American and the world audiences once again heard a reference to George Washington, who said that preparations for war is one of the most effective means of keeping the peace. The incumbent president is possibly unaware that this adage was borrowed by Washington, an educated man for his time, from ancient Romans, and is a paraphrase of the famous Si vis pacem para bellum. If you want peace, prepare for war. But this is in fact a small and not very important detail. The real question is whether this time-worn piece of common knowledge applies to our time. What does a policy built on it by both sides have to offer? And what has it offered so far, except the arms race? Even back, almost in George Washington's time, the limits of this ancient wisdom were quite obvious. In the year of 1818, none other than President James Monroe, whom I think President Reagan is bound to respect, stated, "Preparations for war is a constant stimulus to suspicion and ill will." Having been perceived already during the Flintlock era, this has become still the more evident in the nuclear age. That is why somewhere in the late 60s, a process has set in of rethinking the political realities and of adjusting policies to them. But hardly have we made a few steps in this direction when we are being pulled back to outdated, worthless, and harmful traditions, concepts, and mentalities. Having said all this, I must assure you that I have no doubts whatsoever as to the sincerity of the feelings of quite a few Americans toward the Soviet Union and for communism, including some Americans who are very visible on political scene. But I would appeal to them not to let their emotions overshadow their real interests. Having studied the United States for many years, I am becoming increasingly convinced that you need us, and need us very badly. And this goes not only for the most obvious, mentioned in one of the recent articles of Russell Baker, that, for instance, without us, the $300 billion American military enterprise would go bankrupt, and the current U.S. foreign policy would lose any rationale. All this is, so to say, merely a tip of an iceberg. We are playing a still greater role in your life, having become a psychological necessity for you, from which the Americans' present self-awareness cannot be divorced, just as one cannot cut off the North Pole of a magnet from the South Pole. I lack professional knowledge to describe this psychological phenomenon with terminological precision. But it seems to me that apart from everything else, we have become a sort of a deep psychological necessity for America, just as the evil spirit is indispensable to a fundamentalist preacher. Only having before your mind's eye such an embodiment of the evil as you have painted us, you can rest assured of remaining a shining city on the hill. That helps a great deal, if only because against such a background it is easier to forget about many problems, about the once glorious American inner cities, which remind me, Stalingrad and Minsk soon after the Second World War, about the homeless, about the crime, which has become $100 billion a year enterprise in the United States, as I learned recently, about drugs, about a lot of problems, including corruption, perversion of democracy, of which you are, of democracy I mean, so proud. Because alongside progress in military technology, there developed a very sophisticated technology of manipulating the voters, the bureaucracy, and even the legislators. You must be accustomed to it, but we are shocked to learn that for every member of Congress, there are about 15 registered lobbyists working on it. And about even the shameless commercialization of the holiest religious feelings of many Americans, represented by misdeeds of the so-called electronic church. All this and many other things are also part of the way of life, of the shining city on the hill. But as long as one can point a finger at us, stigmatize us, wage a relentless struggle against us, it becomes possible to forget about all these things. This may be good for your peace of mind, although it may become dangerous to your health, like any tranquilizer if it is abused. But let me again return to the main topic, to the Soviet and American concepts of international security. I think we see at the moment, I hope it is a temporary event, a striking asymmetry, a movement not only past each other, but in trajectories which can make a very dangerous collision possible. The Soviet Union does not believe in the inevitability of such an outcome. We cannot take the present American position for the final answer on many problems, including arms control and tests and many others. I believe we are right in thinking that both in the United States and in the world there are political developments underway which might lead to considerable changes. And we understand our responsibility that we are not passive onlookers. We have to help this process, to help it by avoiding doing negative things, interfering with it, and helping it by our contribution to the positive development of this process. This is the context in which one should also understand our idea of creating a comprehensive international security system, which was advanced at the Party Congress. The basic principles of the system should cover, in our view, 4 major areas: military, political, economic, and humanitarian. Military area, well, it's mainly, I don't have, I see already time to dwell upon it at length, that we should look at disarmament as a more dependable means to increase security than armaments. I think this is one of the lessons of this 40 years. We had more and more missiles, more and more weapons, and less security. In political sphere, it is mainly the main idea is accommodation, understanding that we are different, that we have to live with the differences. And this is not only our idea. I think all of these ideas, they were written on many walls. They come from Einstein to Russell, later some of them from other sources. And I would remind you that on June the 10th, 1963, another son of Harvard, John Kennedy, in a very important speech, urged not to see conflict as inevitable, accommodation as impossible, and communication as nothing more as an exchange of threats. And, said he, if we cannot end now our differences, at least we can help make the world safe for our diversity. Economic sphere becomes also very important, and it was neglected up till now. Even the term of economic security is not very popular, though it becomes a tremendously important part of our life and a very dangerous source of danger. Including the debt problem, which must be interesting for you from both sides, as the creditor country and as a debtor country. You have become both. And you know, the awful, desperate situation of third world, which just cannot go on, and there is an absolute need to stop the lip service to this problem and to start real efforts to create the new economic order about which we speak so much. And finally, the humanitarian field, which includes human rights, which includes also fight against, I would say, spiritual pollution, against ideas of racial intolerance, fascism, genocide, ideas of genocide, national or religious exclusiveness and discrimination, etc. And of course, increase of contacts, creation of a atmosphere, of a background when we know much better each other, where there is much less place for prejudices, ignorance, and grave mistakes. Of course, what we propose to the world and to the United States is not our last word and is not an ultimatum. We are ready and eager to discuss all realistic and reasonable proposals of the other side. But we have to live up to realities of our time. And we have to think bold and, as you say, big. with humble understanding of the fact that we together, both our nations, represent only 10% of the humanity, and that we have closely associated our destiny with the outside world, depend on it greatly, and should, indeed must, behave in it in a sensible fashion. Both of us have no special privileges. Mankind does not need America or Soviet Union to save it, nor does it need a situation someday where it will have to be saved from America or Soviet Union. What mankind really needs is that the United States and USSR should pull together their efforts to prevent nuclear war, strengthen international security, bring about more favorable conditions for the economic progress of all people, the advance of culture and democracy, and the solution of global problems. And this is what the Soviet Union and the United States need too. Thank you.
Dr. Arbatov is willing to address questions. Let me reiterate for you the ground rules. The audience has come to listen to Dr. Arbatov, not to our questioners. You can put your questions of any sort in a minute or less, but not more. And we will recognize people from the various microphones. The forum event is being recorded for rebroadcast on National Public Radio, so you need to speak into the microphones, and any of the dinner guests are also welcome to put questions. We'll start with the lady here on the microphone A.
Thank you. Mr. Arbatov, when will the Soviet leadership publicly recognize the failure of your colonial adventurism in Afghanistan and finally withdraw the Soviet troops from that tormented and tortured country?
This was a short speech, but quite a speech. Yes. You know, what we really want is a political solution in this country. And I think what some people here want, this country to share the worst of what has hit Iran. And I think we must find a reasonable way to deal with this problem, not to create a bloodbath, and to end the war there. And we are ready to do it. And we would be helpful to you, Miss, and to United States, and to all other countries if they are helpful in this process. Negotiations are underway. They are going, I'm sorry to say, very slowly. But we are eager to have them ended successfully and to withdraw our troops.
Microphone B.
Dr. Arbatov, my question also concerns Afghanistan. Since 1979, the Soviets have perpetuated a policy which has resulted in roughly, experts estimate, between 600,000 and 1 million Afghan deaths and 4 to 5 million Afghan refugees, which is half the population in that country. Currently, 125,000 Soviet troops are estimated to be in the region. Several months ago, Dr. Armacour of the United Nations led a fact-finding commission and published a book claiming that the Soviets were using various chemical weapons and other untested and illegal weaponry in Afghanistan. Sir, if you could comment, why did the Soviets go into Afghanistan? What are they doing there? And when are they going to get out? If you could flesh out some of your reactions, sir, to what you told the other questioner.
Well, you know, this was a very effective exercise in heaping up a lot of lies in a very short time about use of chemical weapons and all of this. It's, you know, you have to be more careful without throwing around such accusations. It is a difficult situation, and you know, if you are concerned about Nicaragua, so this is on our borders. I would remind you that Managua is at the same distance from Washington as Gibraltar or Afghanistan from Moscow. And this is something which goes on there. And why it was done, I have written it in my book, and there are many other books. I don't want to return to it. I think the major thing is what to do with this problem now. And I have already answered this question before.
We're going to microphone C up here on the balcony, and let me say to the people on the third floor, if you want to ask a question, you have to come down to one of the microphones. Microphone C.
Yes, Dr. Arbatov, you mentioned human rights in passing, and many of us are very interested in that subject. A year after he applied for an exit visa, Dr. Yevgeny Gilbo was deprived of all his academic degrees, and he lost his position as a senior researcher in mathematics at Leningrad Polytechnic Institute. The American Mathematical Society has been unable to get any explanation of this action from authorities in the Soviet Union. My questions are, sir, why does the Soviet Union revoke earned degrees solely because the person requests an exit visa? And why are we unable to get information on Dr. Gilbo?
Well, you know, you have in general no special rights in our country, so you can humbly ask for explanation, not to demand them from me. And, you know, you have a lot of cases in your country. Peltier is in a prison. You have this court in Tucson, which is going on, where very, I think, decent and very honorable citizens are persecuted, etc., etc. If we just exchange, you know, offenses because of it, it won't lead us anywhere. There might be a case with a certain doctor of mathematics in Leningrad. I never heard about him until I came here. And I don't know why his degree was taken away. Maybe he has committed plagiarism, maybe it was something different, maybe it was a mistake or an unjust deed. I don't know. But it happens, you know, in big countries it happens sometimes.
Or microphone D up here.
Thank you. I understand the Politburo has over 500 members. I was wondering how many of those members have visited the United States in the past 10 years, and perhaps how many can be expected to visit us in the next 10?
Well, you know, as far as I can recall, Sherbitsky has visited, this I know for sure, because I was with him. It happened last year. And Gromyko was here many times. Solomintsov was here. This is the third. Among the candidate members and secretaries of Central Committee, maybe 3 or 4 more. I think this is maybe a little bit bigger proportion than of members of cabinet of United States who visited Soviet Union. But I think it is not normal that so many Americans were not in Soviet Union, even important Americans, and so many important Russians haven't visited United States. I think this is one of the problems. And we try to do it now with parliamentary delegations, and starting actually from students, even from kids, from adolescents, well, in their teens. And I think this should be done. This is an investment in our future, which will not work very quick, but which will help us to avoid some troubles. And this is a very good safety device, I think, which we need simply now. And if you invite our members of Politburo, as I understood you, I will tell them.
We will issue an invitation. We're back to microphone A.
Yes, Dr. Arbatov, it seems like since the summit and in the last few years, the Soviet Union has actually responded rather mildly to some things that one could call quite provocative that the United States has done. And
One of this size has to be reasonable. You know?
Can I just finish the question? It seems to me that it has fostered a feeling that or the notion that the Soviet Union responds well to strength and forcefulness, and that'll make the Soviet Union back off. And I'm wondering if you feel, it seems to me that that's a dangerous understanding of ours. And I'm wondering if you would say that that is true, that the Soviet Union responds well, in our view, to demonstrations of strength.
Well, you know, we try to be reasonable. And we understand our responsibility. And we think that it would be a bad thing to try to compete with some Americans to do political obscenities and to try to inflict harm on the other side. At the same time, that the provocative behavior of some American statesmen and American policies during last years, I think it is dangerous because, you know, you make it difficult for the other side, especially if then it is used to create a whole concept, which Leslie Gelb described recently in New York Times, that the Russians are on the run, you have now to press them, etc., etc. This is a very dangerous self-delusion. With such self-congratulatory, you know, policy and posture, you will get for sure into trouble sometimes. So I would prefer you to be cautious as well.
Back to microphone B.
Yes. Mr. Arbatov, I respectfully request that answer very seriously to my question, not with a joke. I was born in the communist-dominated country.
Jokes are the most serious thing in life, I think.
For you, sir, not for me.
You have no sense of humor?
No, sir. It's a matter of death and life, and you don't appreciate. You appreciate this freedom in the United States more than in the Soviet Union. So back to the question. I was born in the Romania, and in this communist-dominated country in 20 years were jailed over 2,500,000 people and were killed over 300,000. The figures are not made up. You cannot deny them. Belongs to Tolstoy Foundation, International Rescue Committee, and the American Women Relations Committee with the people residing in that country. And this was done in the name of the communism. I myself was in jail because my father used to belong to the former Communist Party system, former plurality system before the communists took over. My question is, sir, that your gloom view for the future is much less worse than the past, dark past of the communism system, who enslaved over 37 nations, with over almost 2 billion people, and killed over 100 million people. And the question now is, do you ever intend to leave this country to have their own election and plurality party system?
Well, you know, you appeal to Mr. Ceausescu with this.
I appeal to you, sir. Please answer seriously.
I can do, it's not I cannot even prove your figures. I think they are lies, outright lies. I know that we had difficult times in our past, and some other nations.
Sir, I'll call you